Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I have some reverb from having it open on another device, but I muted it. Okay. Hello, and welcome to this event for Clean Air by Sarah Blake. We are very excited to have both Sarah and her conversation partner, Claire Holroyde. Is that it? Is that right? Okay, good. I didn't want to mess it up. I'm Laura, and I'm the event coordinator here at the Astoria Bookshop, which is the bookshop hosting this event. If you don't know who we are because you stumbled upon here or you're a friend of the author, we are a bookshop in Astoria, Queens, and we cater to everyone, but we are queer and women-owned, and we love featuring diverse female authors, like the ones we have today. Before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions during the last 10 minutes, but you can start writing them at any point in the Ask a Question feature. It should be a little thing down there. Just type your question. You can vote on other people's questions if there's something you really want answered. If you can chat with one another in the right, on the little chat on the right. Please keep your language respectful. No racism, homophobia, anything that you would not want your boss or parents seeing. You will be kicked from the event if you violate our code of conduct, but that is not usually a problem. Finally, there is a button at the bottom to buy a signed copy of the book. We have a limited quantity, so get yours as fast as you can. And let's get started by introducing our guests. All right, so first we have Sarah Blake, the wonderful author we are celebrating today. Her novel, is it Nama?
That's a great way to say it. I'm open to all pronunciations.
I heard Neama.
All right, well, it won the National Jewish Book Award for debut fiction. Blake is also the author of the poetry collections Mr. West and Let's Not Live on Earth. In 2013, she was awarded a literature fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. That's really impressive. She currently lives in the UK. And Claire Holroyde is a writer, graphic designer, and storyteller living in the Philadelphia metro area. She is a proud member of the Climate Fiction Writers League, and The Effort is her first novel. All right, I will leave you guys to it, and I will be back around 1:50.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. It is so great to meet a fellow climate fiction writer who is a native Philadelphian. And I wanted to show you that I was wearing my love pin for the Robert Indiana statue in Love Park, and also for Valentine's Day. And also it was great to see, it was a treat to have little parts of the book. I could tell that you were a writer from Southeast Pennsylvania. I think our protagonist even was enrolled in Villanova University, which is in my backyard. So that was really fun. So it's great to meet you. Yeah, I wanted to first dive into the wonderful world building of Clean Air. And as we begin the book, basically there was a catastrophic event that called the turning, where there's been a bloom of toxic pollen, mostly from trees. And it kills about half the human population. And so the government is overthrown, and a new government comes in and allows a big tech company to level the ruins of our world and rebuild strongholds, these strongholds of survivors with robots. And so as I was reading this, I just kind of thought about, it reminded me of what's called a red tide, which is a massive bloom of red algae, and it creates toxins, and it just kills a lot of creatures. And it's becoming a major problem because of fertilizer runoff from industrial farming, and it is believed climate change. That was just one reader's, I guess, process as I was reading the beginning. As the creator, what was the inspiration behind the turning?
Yeah, so what I was having really bad asthma. Again, I was diagnosed with asthma when I was 8, and so it was really bad then. I was tested for a million things, and when I was, or through most of the rest of my life, it only came up like when I was playing a field hockey game or something like that. But then somehow something hit when, I guess, like 5 years ago. So yeah, I like made it like a decade without having an asthma attack. And the next thing I knew, every time spring rolled around, I was ending up in the ER with uncontrollable asthma. And so I ended up going back to an allergist, getting tested all over again, and doing the thing. And because when I was a kid, they had to do it all on my back because, your arms aren't big enough to test a bazillion things. So it was kind of easier but then you do walk around like a monster with like all these welts and things.
Yeah, I've had it.
Yeah. So I did all of that, and I found out that I'm allergic to like everything. It was weird. It was like everything but ragweed, which is the one that everyone else is allergic to. But for some reason, that's fine for me. And I even they got really specific about the trees and which trees, and and like willow was my worst one. Like I've never had a welt so big as I did from a willow tree. And so, we were just kind of trying to figure it out. So I ended up getting allergy shots every week, and things did calm down. And I did a lot of asthma medication to kind of get back to normal. So for me, I was like, well, what if this happened to everyone? Like, what if it wasn't just people with these sensitivities? So even in my mind, it's not even so much maybe that the trees got especially toxic. It's just that there was something that made other people as sensitive as the people who, like me, who already are. Because I've definitely, not been close to death, but understanding like how close it could be if I just can't ever get my breathing back under control. I guess we talk about it a lot more now with like oxygen levels, and you should have an oximeter at home. It's not that hard, and you should just check it because you don't know. And what coughs look like. So it was a lot of sitting in those allergy shop waiting rooms, because you have to wait 30 minutes after you had them to make sure you're not having a horrible reaction. And I did a lot of world building there, just as I would sit and kind of dream up like what would happen. Because I mentioned in the book this piece of paper that tracks what trees are at peaking when, and it's often in the news reports and things like that. And they had that right where you went to get your shot. Like I just turn my head and see this old school Xerox thing that had all the trees that were in our area and when they were in bloom, I guess, and then also when it was peaking. And if you knew which trees were your bad trees, which for me was all of them, I was just like, oh, so like I'm bad for the whole spring. So that's where that came from.
That makes total sense. Yeah. So I think the book begins 10 years after the turning, roughly. And so basically we have buildings that are constructed within plastic domes with filtered air. And you have self-driving cars that kind of transport people to and from these domes. And people, I think the protagonist, Izabel, says it's generally the consensus that they know that this is some way attributed to human activity. And that no one is surprised when there is a reckoning, just the shape in which it manifested, which I think was interesting. And so life continues, and people have adapted and kind of moved on. But there is an overlying threat of danger. And it reminded me of COVID-19, where you're constantly worried about the air that you breathe, and you have to wear masks. So I'm going to ask the question that I think probably a lot of readers will ask. I'm sure you've gotten this. How much did living with COVID-19 influence the story, if at all?
Yeah, luckily I had finished drafting this book before COVID entirely, because I don't think I would have probably been able to write it if I was dealing with such similar fears at the same time. But no, when I had sent my first book out to agents, I was like, no one's going to take this book, and if I don't start working on the next project, I am gonna just lose my mind. So I'm just I started and finished drafting like in 2017, 2018. So it was even like before I moved to the UK. Like it was, but a lot of the editing happened in the midst of the thick of it. And it was an interesting way to kind of check myself on like, well, what, we're seeing it now actually, like how our stressors manifest, toilet paper runs, like all these things. So it was a lot to think about. For a while I was saving every email that came in that was about this, that was about like what was kind of happening, what did responses look like, if I was getting anything about the local buses and how they were changing their schedule, I was saving it. And so not much change though with clean air, which I think was really helpful for me, that like I really had picked something just slightly off, not really a likely player in terms of what can go wrong for us, and which made me feel a little bit more comfortable. Like there's a clean air, you kind of get to explore those fears, but you don't have to have them, because the chances are pollen will never come for us.
An unlikely future. Yes, future.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of fun science to play with it, but you don't, like, I don't have that fear associated with it, because I'm like, it is just pollen, and most of us are fine with that.
Yep. All right. And so you have this future that you've built, and it has things like a basic income. And so in many ways, it kind of feels like a utopia, but it isn't, because I mean, you definitely ground it in that, you can't go outside without a mask. There's still cancer. Like, I think you're careful to say all the ways in which this is not a utopia. There's a serial killer on the loose in our given town. So we still have humans doing human things, good and bad. So I guess you can pass on any question that I give you, especially the ones that, are personal, because authors should have all the privacy that they want. But did you rebuild a world that you wanted to see?
I mean, I definitely loved that I got to incorporate anything that I was excited about. Yeah. Like basic income is something, especially as I imagine, as a struggling artist, writer, trying to go that route, is something that would change my life so significantly. If that was just off the table, and instead I could publish the books I wanted, and I could publish with smaller presses if I want, and I just don't, like, just so many things would drop away. And even like electric cars, like the whole reason that electric cars are failing so badly is because we're trying to integrate them with other kinds of traffic. Really, they do what they're supposed to do, and they do it pretty well. And we're seeing that from some of the communities around that are trying them. But yeah, they've had some of their failures. But I was thinking, if you took out just like pedestrians randomly coming into the road and whatever, then really, like, they would do their job, and they would do it well and safely, and they work. And yeah, so there were a lot of things that I was really intrigued to play with. There were some things that were terrifying, like thinking about a kid going off to school in a self-driving car made me really scared. For some reason, it's like I'd let my kid get on the bus. But that was different to me. I was like, no. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that were really interesting to play with, but I also, like, I'm obsessed with utopias that aren't utopias. Like, to me, that's what the arc is like. God is like, you're gonna rebuild the world, and it's gonna be better than it was, and like you're with all the same pieces. You get all the same pieces to do it again, but this time it's gonna work. And then to have Naima kind of come to terms with like the possibility of that, plus the unlikelihood of that, plus the position of godliness that kind of puts her into. And so that's kind of it. But also in my poetry, I have a book length poem that's about this woman who gets on a spaceship and ends up in a utopic world with, I don't want to give away too much, but she kind of finds her ways to understand how to manipulate a utopia as such to find happiness. I don't know. I just have a lot of fun with it, with thinking about utopias that aren't utopias. But especially because I find it really difficult. I feel like a scientist that has like too many uncontrolled elements. So like I like to take out as many things as I can so that I'm really just looking at a few things that are affecting the experiment, you know? And that was one of the reasons I loved clean air as an environment, because you take out people being able to be outside and everything's so much more controlled. All the scary stuff of that you think of with a dystopic event of like gangs and guns and rioting and like a survival mode and like the, you know, the kind of the road and Cormac McCarthy and like the animals coming out and people, you know, like that's gone. Like that's just gone. It can happen in a different way, but it can't happen in that way. And that makes it something that I feel much more comfortable exploring a lot of the time.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you removed variables, things you took out, which is, you know, a lot of just like outside, and there was a lot of just being inside interiors, and Izabel and her family, just a lot of domestic life was brought in. So I'm gonna talk about things that you did bring in, that you added. So I mean, and I guess because this is a near future book, it can automatically sometimes get categorized as speculative science fiction. And you do have some elements of that where you kind of, you know, you mentioned the self-driving cars. But it didn't really, to me, have that feel of speculative science fiction. And I think one of the reasons for that was just all the paranormal elements that you brought in. And so Izabel, the protagonist, her daughter Cami, is 4 years old, and she is you represented 4 years old is hard to represent well, and I think you nailed it. And that was difficult, and you nailed it in a way that made it perfectly creepy when she starts talking in her sleep on the night of the first murder in what becomes a series of random killings in this town. And so Cami does not remember the phenomenon when she's awake, but when she is asleep, she speaks different sides of a conversation. And on one side, she's Cami, the 4-year-old, and the other side is an unknown entity that knows Cami and is also aware of the serial killer when he is prowling at night looking to strike. Which was very interesting. And so I think the word that I know is possession, but the word that the characters used is inspirited. So with that, you also have a tarot card reading. You also have a seance with a ghost. So I was actually surprised by all these paranormal elements that you added in, and so I just was hoping you would talk. I mean, they were fun. I was hoping you could talk about them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came from my son's media consumption. Like so many shows for him are about monsters and ghosts, and one of his favorites, again and again, he'll kind of like forget the series and then rewatch it all again, is Yokai Watch, which I bring up in the
you bring it up in the book.
Yeah, he loves Yokai Watch, and I fell in love with it too. And I had also watched, there's some anime for adults. Well, I mean, it's not just for adults, but I don't think he would like it because it gets quite gruesome at times. But definitely, like, as soon as you're an older kid, you'd like it. Nura, Rise of the Yokai Clan, and the Parade of the 100 Demons, or the Night Parade of, I don't know. I forget. It's a long title. I just call it Nura because that's the first part and it's his name, Nura. And I had loved that show. So it was so interesting to see that show kind of then like all the same characters. When I watched that show when I was younger, I didn't realize how truthful it was to real folklore that was happening, that was coming from Japan. I thought it was another anime, and you know, anime can be really wide ranging in its sources. And but then I was like, wait, I know that character, but in this show it's just like a goofy guy that's helping kids handle when they're embarrassed or something. And it was like, what? Like, and so then I did a deep dive again into yokai and what they were. I ended up reading a super scholarly book about it, which I adored, actually. But I was finding it was all over what my son was watching and what was targeted at my son, and what and still, even like every book we read has dragons in it. Like there's not a lot of realism going on aimed at his age group. It's so much fantasy. There's so much playfulness and magic. So I was getting it through him. Also, I started out in the poetry world. I still am in it. I just feel like I'm a little bit removed. I'm mostly from the move to the UK, actually, because like all of my poets are in the US. But there's a huge resurgence of tarot and talking about tarot and the different decks and designing new tarot decks. And I have a lot of friends who pick a card every morning, and I have people who do quick reads over Twitter if you like are paying attention to when they post about it. And then the seance, I mean, obviously I was interested in part because of some of the television shows. I didn't watch the Medium show that was on, what was it? TLC or Bravo, or I don't know. She's on one of the Long Island Medium, but I love cake. I love Cake Boss, and like Cake Boss at one point like made a cake for her that was her size, or I don't know if it was that or it was the cake competition that he did. So like I was very aware of her and that show and the popularity of that show. But I also grew up in a town that had a medium, and her daughter was my age. So I had play dates at her house and witnessed, or I don't remember this, but my mother tells me, like, witnessed her slipping into voices of other people that she was channeling. So so all of these things were like pretty near and dear to me from different times in my life, and all somehow came together for this book. But I really just wanted to think, if we took organized religion off the table, but still people were looking for what to turn to, I would think that spiritualism would be a really interesting thing for that, and all in all its forms. And if people were interested in continuing any of those, and you put them all in the same building, then people could really explore them pretty freely in an interesting way. It was inspired by so many different directions, but really has like some of the parts have been with me since I was little, and then some were really by my son and the shows that he was watching, or things that I realized, oh, I had watched all about this. Like I know all about this, and I love this. And it was Yokai Watch is a really interesting one, especially to me, where they'll have some of the most terrifying yokai that have some of the most terrifying stories behind them. And then they'll just make them kind of playful. And I've been thinking about that for years. Like I've been thinking about it with Monsters Inc. even, like, and he had another app that was Monsters that taught him about his alphabet, and he loved it. And all of a sudden he knew all his letter sounds. And there was another TV show that was Monsters doing math. And I was like, wow, this thing that's supposed to be terrifying, right? Like our idea of monsters has become completely playful. And I've just been curious. I have a whole set of poems about that too, because I'm just really curious about like what we're doing in terms of how we construct and deconstruct fear, and maybe in some ways in really helpful ways for kids. But in some ways, like it's not the childhood that I remember, where we really had super scary stories, and where I could page through the channels on TV and come across a slasher movie. Like
and Hans Christian Andersen are terrifying. Those the fairy tales there.
Yeah, the first time I read
like, don't do this, or
Yeah. When I read The Real Little Mermaid, I was like, oh no.
Oh my God, I was in tears. I was weeping. Yeah. And then Cinderella, they like the stepsisters were cutting their feet to fit into.
Yeah, that's Into the Woods. So I knew that from Into the Woods, and he made it funny. He makes everything funny. But I remember like looking back when I went to show my son Into the Woods, and they're like pouring blood out of the shoe, and I'm like, why did I find this funny? Like, I still love it. I still find it funny, but I don't know how to explain it to you. Yeah.
So I guess piggybacking on myth, I wanted to thank you that we got a great introduction. And your first novel, Naama, is like I guess a feminist retelling of an origin myth with Noah and the Ark after the Great Flood, but through the eyes of Naama, who is Noah's wife. And so I found an interview where you said that you began that novel out of a sense of helplessness with current events, specifically gun violence and also the rise of anti-Semitism. So I was curious with how that your journey was different for Clean Air, both in where you began and also because I think you said in Naama you wanted to end with a sense of power and joy. And that's what you wanted for yourself, and that's what you wanted for Naama. So moving off of that, where did you want Izabel? Like why did you start this novel, and where did you want Izabel and you to end up at the end?
Yeah, it was super interesting to write a novel again that I didn't have a cast of characters from the get-go from another story. So I actually started the whole book after I'd done all the world building in my head during allergy shots and whatever. When I started to write, I knew that I wouldn't return to the page every day unless I was in love with my main character. So I started by writing letters from Izabel to Cami, and I wrote like 40 pages of letters.
Oh, I remember the letters. Okay.
Yeah, until I started really understanding who Izabel was and how I felt about her and how she would feel about Cami. And I wanted to make her very much like me, where I love being a stay-at-home mom, but it also has feelings of isolation and suffocation almost, and a lack of purpose, even though you know you have one. But like I find especially young motherhood, where I tried to go back to work when he was 1, and he was getting ear infections constantly. Like we couldn't have a cold without then having an ear infection, and so fevers and antibiotics. And I was like, am I really like doing the right thing? So when he was 2, took him back out again. When he was 3, he was able to go back to school and have a cold like everybody else just had it, and then it was over. So all those years were like such a puzzle for me of figuring out like how do I keep us both happy, and what does that look like, and what things can I find around, and how do I do it on a budget, and like how do I justify all these things to myself. And it was a really difficult time that I don't know how else to replicate. Like that will never happen to me again. Like now he's just in school. It takes up so much of his day and my day, and it's free, and like public school is amazing. And we're all happy, and I just we work around those times. It's just it's so weird. Like I don't know even how to describe like this was the closest I could get to describing young motherhood, and it took me 300 pages. I'm like, what was your question? Like I got so into that.
Where did you want to end? Where did you want Izabel to be when you ended, and where did you want to be with Izabel?
Yeah. So I wanted the way I think about Naama a lot was that like Naama's journey was horrific in so many ways. And so I tried to just give her gifts constantly. Like, what gift can you give a woman who's stuck on a boat? Okay, she'll start swimming. Like that was the first gift. And then I just kept piling on gifts and seeing what she would do with them. With Izabel, I kind of thought the same way. Like, how can I help her? But then helping her seemed to be to get her involved in tracking down a serial killer, which is not helpful and certainly not safe. But it did interrupt and disrupt what her life was. And how it might continue, and how she might finally start thinking about herself in ways that are helpful for her. so I don't want to talk too much about the end. I do have because I don't think there's the same sense of power and joy in the same way that there is with Nima, but there's a really complex ending to me. And I don't ever know, like, did I give her a good ending or a bad ending? She's in a very interesting spot at the end. And that I love for that reason, I think, but because it's so much more lifelike, like that. Those are the kinds of positions we're in. Okay, well, this opportunity is here now. Is it a good one? Is it a bad one? Will you regret this 5 years later? You don't know. Okay, great. But I did want to give her a new sense of how to think about herself and what she could ask for herself, and what that looks like, asking for things for yourself. And yeah, and I always tried to veer away from, I think, writing things that are sad, which is a weird way to put a very complicated thing. I think it's very easy to write things sad because life gets sad very quickly in a variety of ways. To like constantly push myself as a writer to not let the worst thing happen, is difficult, because I often just try to follow things. Like, I'm not someone who plots things out, so I just follow them to how I really think they would happen. But then I do have to push against, one, of course, the expected, but two, I try to push against the worst, the worst thing, or the thing that would break you, because I know a lot of people that are doing that and do it beautifully. But I know that I often have to avoid those books, because I'm like, oh, unless you're going to tell me which pages I can skip, because that chunk's going to break my heart, then I don't think I can read this book knowing that that's coming. Like, I'm a very bad suspense reader. Like, when my mother gave me Rosemary's Baby and one of the Anne Rice books, and I could just feel the tension on the page, and I was just like, I don't know, I can keep going. Like, I'd rather, like, now I think I could probably read it because I know what happens in those books because of things like Wikipedia. So I can know the worst part, but I have a very high response, scary response to stress, and I can really feel it. So I part of me too, I think, was exploring that. Like, can I even handle this book? And those feelings of tension, and when they're given to you by the whole world constantly, and what are you going to do with that? Because that is what it started to feel like. We're in the UK now, and that was largely because of gun violence and anti-Semitism. So I feel I can't even explain to you how much more at ease I feel in my daily life without those things as part of my worry when my son's at school or when we're traveling, which we haven't traveled in a while, but when we did. But yeah, so that experiencing that kind of stress, which you're not even supposed to be experiencing, and is easy to push out of your head to experience it all, because really you're going around and having a fine time, and you went to that cafe and it was fine, and you went to Target and it was fine, and whatever, like, you can forget, and then it just comes back for you, and it comes back for you at moments that are usually the worst to have them. And it's, this like just kind of background stress. I know a lot of people are having in the States right now for under 5s, where everybody else seems to be vaccinated. So so much fear has alleviated for them, but it hasn't. But for us over here, they haven't vaccinated under 12s yet either. They're just starting to for at-risk children or children living with at-risk adults. But so we're in the same boat, a lot of us. And it's going through the schools like wildfire, and there's no real stopping it right now. And there's no plan to stop it the way that they did before, because it's not ever getting to the point that it's stressing the hospitals again. So they're fine with how it's going. And you can get the sense that they would change things if it starts to stress the hospitals again. And you're like, am I supposed to feel grateful for that? It's like there's a net somewhere, but it's real far down.
Yeah. When we started this Crowdcast, we were talking about the cover with Laura from Astoria Books. And during the week, I'm a graphic designer. That's how I make a living. And so I'm very obsessed with book covers. And I think we were all like, oh, I think you said, oh, it's so grainy, but then you've got the spot varnish on the blueberries. I also love interpreting them. And I went online to kind of hear what other people were saying about the cover. And I think, I found one podcaster who really liked the book, but didn't understand the cover. And so I was trying to think as I read it, what it meant to me. And I guess in this future, you have nature as more of a victor than a victim. And it's very much big and bountiful and poisonous and very much taking care of itself. So that's kind of what this thought, like that's how I interpreted this myself. But I would love to hear your interpretation as you went through the process of creating the cover.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because they came to me with that cover. The artwork was slightly different just in terms of I don't remember there was some complication with the art, but it was the berries, the colors, the water droplets, and then the font was just different. And then we talked about the font a little bit more. So I really didn't that was really similar to Name It as well. But I know with my poetry collection, sometimes they'll come to me with a few different versions and say, okay, what do you think? How can we move through these and get to the right spot? And so, yeah, this one I really didn't have, like, they were like, we've seen other versions, but we're all agreed that this is the one. And then, now I will be curious forever what the other ones were. But I'm really interested in what a cover does actually. Like, I remember when they showed me Nema and I knew there was suddenly going to be a tiger on it, that it changed my next reading of my own book, because the tiger, then I noticed so much more every time I brought her up. I was like, oh,
cover matter.
Tiger. Yeah. Like, and it changed the emphasis there. And too, so like with Clean Air, with the berries on the front, I notice more every time she talks about the produce and the oversized produce, because there's only really one scene where she talks about an oversized blueberry. There's a few more where they talk about produce, and she talks about it coming up in the news or in, or just the things that Cami's eating most of all.
Aside from fruit and vegetables, there's also just, nature is kind of like spilling out into things. Like it is very big and bountiful all the time and toxic. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I thought of when I saw the cover.
Yeah, because that's, there's no sign of them being different colors or anything like that happening. And, seeing things like that gives me a little bit of flashbacks to like when Simpsons is making jokes about things that have been messed up because there's next to this nuclear plant,
Oh, Blinky the fish.
Yeah. I have like those vibes a little, but this isn't caused by us. This is their chance to go crazy. I loved switching the table a bit. I think because, at the time I was drafting this was probably right around where we pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And I was just thinking about these agreements and the world working together, but there was no accountability. Like, it's still just a bunch of people in a room just kind of going like, all right. And
I pledged to in 50 years, I pledge.
Yeah. And I was like, man, what if our tables involved spokespeople for plants and not spokespeople, spokes things, spokes plants, spokes animals. And there was real accountability with the natural world. Like, if you didn't do it, well, they have their own recourse for you, which isn't false in a lot of ways, like, right, like the planet is punishing us for what we've done to it. We're not going to have access to certain kinds of food. We are like, everything is changing. We have to constantly make changes in how we farm things, grow things. Like, we're having to learn things we've never had to learn before. Like, we're messing with pollinators, so we have to experiment with new ways to do pollination. Like, everything, they're making plans for not necessarily us stopping, but it hitting the worst of the worst. And so we have to figure out pollinations in other ways. So we are getting punished. But this was so much more victorious, that they punished through these things that seem almost possible, because every once in a while we get these articles that are like, you know what? trees are talking, and we've got the mycelial, I'm probably going to say words wrong, but like network, and there, we have the fungus is working in this way, and this is, and then you get a new article that's like, you know what, we could record them, and it like basically sounds like a song, and like here's an eerie recording of what this sounds like, and you're like, oh my gosh, like we're not so far away from understanding some of the things that are going on and what communication looks like for them. And it's like, it's not too many steps away to go, well, what if they could really make a decision about what goes down? And I also I started watching a lot of the videos about pollen, and like people, there have been a few that go viral where like someone bumps a tree and the pollen like just goes off in this crazy cloud.
Wow.
And I made a list on YouTube if anybody wants to watch them, because I just was like, I should just put them all in one place because I love them, and they're so bizarre, and they look so much more terrifying. And you can just you can pull down a tree that is going hard, and just it's the yellowness that comes out of it. You're like, what if you were standing there? What if you breathed that in? That doesn't look okay.
It's like sulfur yellow. It's like vivid yellow. And I remember in spring you would go out and see your car covered with that stuff, and you're just like, oh wow, that's in the air. It is kind of a shock. You do forget nature, like what nature does with the air and pollen. So I thought that was an interesting part of the book. Yeah. So I know that you were also introduced as you were granted with the National Endowment for the Arts a fellowship. That's really incredible. It makes you unique in that you are so skilled in two different formats, and they're very different. Like long form fiction and poetry to me are so different. I only work in one. I was just creative. I guess I was curious in the creative process how much they interplay as you create stories or create poems. Like, is there an interplay between fiction and poetry when you are crafting?
Yeah, it's really interesting because for me, I mean, I'd never written fiction other than when a class forced me to. I wasn't good at short stories. Like I was never good at it. Nothing good came of me trying to write a story ever. I think the only time I did a decent job was there was like a 7th grade project that was I was allowed to write a fake chapter missing from To Kill a Mockingbird. And that was when my mom said, she's like, I realized you were going to be a writer or something, because it just sounds like it belongs in the book. And I could kind of do that. I could kind of mimic someone else. But when it came to my own writing with fiction, I just like, my brain just was like, I don't know.
So you naturally go towards poetry.
I was writing poetry since I was 10, and that felt perfect. Like everything made sense with that, and did for years and years and years. And it wasn't until I was working, one of my poems was made into a movie by Aisha Altanach because of Motion Poems, which is this amazing organization. And then we were talking, and I'd been writing all these poems about biblical women, kind of retelling their stories. And she's like, well, why don't you write me a short screenplay? And I was like, okay. And I wrote her this 10-minute play that became the first chapter of Nema. But I wouldn't have known, like all of those things were just kind of surprised me. And it really was that 2016 election where something snapped in me. And I was like, let me just allow myself to go into prose, because I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And Nema just kind of poured out of me. And any moment I had, which wasn't a lot because my son was very young, and I think he was in kindergarten at the time, but it was a half-day program for much of the year. So it was still in like little windows. I remember like typing chunks of Nema on my phone while he was in a swim lesson, like things like that. But then I realized how I could do it, and I realized how it felt for me. And like writing fiction feels super, like I slow the world down. It feels really comforting. I get to disappear into this world. I fall in love with the world. I fall in love with my character. it feels so calm and peaceful sometimes. And I know even if I write for a whole day and I end up scrapping all of it, that it doesn't matter. Like, and I still got to spend time that day in the world that I love, and it felt good for me. Where poetry, it feels really electric to me. It's really fast paced writing it. Like, I am really concerned about how I move down the page and my logical leaps. And, I'm not wading through a world. I need to have certain elements of inspiration going on. I need to be interested in how one image bumps up against another in a way that sparks something for me. And I really, sometimes I look for those things, and sometimes they hit me. And so I usually can't even write both genres at the same time. Like, if I'm in novel mode, like, I stick in that for months and months and months. And then when it's done, I notice poems certainly start coming out again. I'm like, oh, there you are. And then I just let them do their thing for however long they're going to do them.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're super different experiences for me, but both of them are so necessary to me now. Like, at first I only thought I needed poetry, and now I'm like, oh, I couldn't give up novel writing. Like, it's a release for me that nothing else is, and it's like, I need it. It's so peaceful for me. And then short stories are the trick for me, because as soon as I start thinking of an idea that's down near that size, I'm like, shouldn't I put that in a poem? Like, it's as soon as it gets smaller, and most of my ideas anyway are too big, and I'm like, oh no, I couldn't fit that in a story anyway. Like, I'd need to dive into that for 300 pages or more.
They do have such a different feel, all those three formats. So I see that we've got 2 more minutes. So I want to do one last question for you. Seeing that you are multi-talented, and also that you just did 2 basically climate fiction, like kind of climate disaster novels back to back, at least in your release dates. What is next for you?
Yeah, so in terms of novels, the next book is this, again, a utopia appearing thing. That's about this very strange hotel that emphasis is on transformative experiences. So, like, you're not supposed to come with your family. Your room is not a big, nice room. Like, you just go there, you just sleep when you're not on your journey, and you're always paired up with a caretaker who kind of constructs your days for you. And they have everything from like dominatrixes to acupuncture to like whole scenarios that you play through the way that you might in like a live role-playing scenario. And yeah, so I really had an amazing time kind of considering this. It's focused on one of the caretakers, and she's really good at her job. And so she's constructing these moments for other people, and, you know, as you might imagine, has to kind of have one of her own by the end of the book. But yeah, it's really strange. I was really inspired by Meow Wolf, the museum that's kind of about having a magical experience and unexpected experiences, but also by things like The Game, which was a 90s movie that I loved. So that's my next book. My next book of poetry comes out next year, and that's about a person that gets lost in the woods with a pregnant horse and a mouse and the ghost of a dead bird. So it has a crisis feel to it, even though nothing specifically has happened in terms of climate or a dystopic event. But for on a personal level, that person has definitely experienced a bad thing, and so has ventured into the woods and got lost.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That's great. Hotels are great settings, by the way. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, I am back. Oh gosh, it's doing that again. Okay. So I wanted to thank everyone who is currently watching again for coming out and supporting wonderful authors. And it looks like we have a question, which is exciting. Can you read an excerpt from the book? Is that something you're up for?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm a poet. Usually that's all I get asked to do.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you had like a little section or an excerpt prepared, so.
I do not, but I will be fine. We'll just pick up wherever.
Just wing it.
Let's see. Okay. At home, at their new home, their things had arrived. Izabel started to go through them, setting up Cami's room before Cami got home from school. She put out her xylophone, her puzzles, her box of Legos, and her magnetic drawing board. But Cami didn't notice when she came back. They'd given each kid a toy at school, a timer to brush your teeth by. It lit up and played a little song that was exactly 120 seconds long. Cami ran to show it to Jana first. Wow, Jana said. Mommy, Cami said, can we play with your makeup? Sure, Izabel said. Cami took Jana's hand and Jana looked nervously at Izabel. She only likes to play with the brushes, Izabel said. Jana mouthed, oh, and followed Cami into the bathroom. Izabel started to figure out dinner. In the fridge, there were lots of condiments and a few pieces of fruit that were going bad, but the freezer was full of frozen meals. She found 4 boxes of pad thai with tofu. Kaito came home and collapsed on the couch. Do you need anything? He asked. I'm okay. You can rest for a bit. Pad thai good for dinner? Yes, he said. They could hear Cami in the bedroom telling Jana, that brings out your eyes, and they both laughed. Ugh, Kaito said. What? Nothing. My arm fell asleep. He draped his arm over his face. I think that how crappy our bodies are is good evidence for evolution versus creation. Like that our legs fall asleep on the toilet? Exactly, he said. And if there was a God, the 8th day would have been toilets and soft toilet paper and other items of convenience. Definitely. And antibiotics. Yeah, you're right. 8th day, medicines, 9th day, items of convenience. Got it. I would have been a decent God, he said. You would have been a great God, Izabel said, and he fell asleep. By bedtime, the toy was broken. The song would stop, but the light wouldn't turn off. After everyone was asleep, after Izabel turned off the light in the bathroom, she saw its light there on the countertop. She wondered if it was bright enough to be seen through the plastic windows of the dome. And would the killer see? And would the killer come? She put the toy in a drawer. Sometimes she thought she drew him toward herself with her dread of him. Thank you for asking that, because I love to read from it. So
You're a good reader.
Thanks.
I always get nervous and stumble over my words. You did a great job.
Oh, I think you're muted, actually. Oh, no. We can't hear you.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, I was just saying thank you to Emily, yes, for asking that question. And we are a little ahead of schedule, but if you'd like to wrap things up with maybe some closing messages, other than buy the book, press the button down there. You can also say that.
Please
then I would love to hear some just closing thoughts.
Well, I'm really grateful for you having me and inviting me, and this has been so amazing. And thank you for hooking me up with Claire. And I've been able to read Claire's book now, and that was such a treat. And sad. Obviously, no.
You don't like tension. I'm like, oh.
At least I just recently read Don't Look Up, so I was very prepared.
Okay.
But yeah, so just a huge thank you to both of you for making this happen.
Oh, good luck with your launch. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I wish great success for the book, and I wish great sales for us, which I'm sure will happen. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. You can find us at astoriabookshop.com or Astoria Bookshop on any social media platform. Almost any social media platform. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Bye.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Astoria.